Welcome back, everyone. We're about to take a deep dive into one of literature's most gripping psychological thrillers. Get ready to explore the dark and complex world of Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
Ooh, Dostoevsky. Always a good choice for a deep dive. This one's going to be intense.
Absolutely. We're going to follow the journey of Rodion Raskolnikov, a young man driven to commit murder, and then we'll unravel the psychological and moral consequences that follow. Guilt, redemption, the whole shebang.
It's a real exploration of the human psyche, Dostoevsky digs deep into those dark corners of our minds and makes us confront some really uncomfortable truths.
Exactly. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to set the stage a bit. We're in 19th century St. Petersburg, a city rife with poverty and suffering. It's hot, it's stifling, and it weighs heavily on our protagonist, Raskolnikov.
Yeah, that atmosphere is almost a character itself, right? It's oppressive, suffocating. You can practically feel the grime and despair. And that's where we find Raskolnikov, a former student, alienated and struggling to survive. He's drowning in this sea of poverty and despair.
And then he encounters Marmeladov, a man completely crushed by life, driven to drink and despair.
Oh, Marmeladov. His story is just heartbreaking. A perfect example of the human cost of poverty. And for Raskolnikov, it's like fuel to the fire. Hearing Marmeladov's tale just reinforces his own twisted worldview.
It's interesting, Dostoevsky himself faced a mock execution for reading banned books.
Wow, seriously?
Yeah, sentenced to death right up to the last minute. I can only imagine the psychological impact that must have had.
No kidding. You can definitely see how that experience would seep into his writing. The themes of suffering, guilt, redemption, they take on a whole new level of depth when you consider what he went through.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got this intense atmosphere, this desperate young man, and then, bam, he commits murder.
The murder of the pawnbroker, right, and her sister, Lizaveta.
Chilling stuff. And Dostoevsky doesn't hold back on the details.
Nope, he goes right into the brutality of it all. But here's the thing. He describes the planning so meticulously, you almost feel like you're in Raskolnikov's head.
Right, it's like you said, getting into those dark corners. But then the act itself, it's almost dreamlike, detached, like he's not really there.
Exactly. That contrast is so deliberate, I think. It highlights the mental and emotional disconnect going on inside Raskolnikov. And then, of course, comes the aftermath, the paranoia, the guilt. Dostoevsky is a master at portraying the psychological torment that follows.
It's like he's almost begging to be caught. Remember that scene where he's talking to the workmen, the ones renovating that apartment?
Oh, yeah. Totally out of the blue, he brings up the murders. Like he wants to confess right then and there.
And then there's that other moment where he gives money to the Marmeladovs. Again, right on the verge of spilling the beans.
It's like he's trying to ease his guilt, maybe even looking for some kind of absolution. Or maybe it's just the sheer weight of it all pushing him towards confession. It's fascinating, though, how those scenes highlight his internal struggle, this constant push and pull between wanting to confess and wanting to hide.
Speaking of the Marmeladovs, we have to talk about Sonia. She's such a pivotal character in all of this.
Sonia, forced into prostitution to support her family, her situation is beyond tragic. But what strikes me most about her is her unwavering faith. Even in the face of such misery, she clings to her beliefs.
It's incredible, isn't it? This contrast between her dire circumstances and her profound sense of morality. She becomes this beacon of hope, not just for the Marmeladovs, but for Raskolnikov, too.
Definitely. She represents everything he's not. Her goodness, her compassion. It's both alluring and repellent to him. He's drawn to her purity, but also repelled by her judgment.
And then there's that powerful scene where he forces her to read the story of Lazarus.
Oh, yeah. Heavy symbolism there. Lazarus rising from the dead, it foreshadows Raskolnikov's own potential for redemption.
Dostoevsky was a master of weaving those biblical parallels into his narratives. Okay, so we've got the crime, the guilt, Sonia's unwavering morality. But before the murders, Raskolnikov develops this disturbing theory about extraordinary men.
Ah, yes. His justification for everything. The idea that certain individuals, like Napoleon, are above conventional morality, that they have the right to break the law for some greater good.
It's a chilling concept, and it's clear that Raskolnikov sees himself in that category, trying to convince himself that his horrific act was somehow justified.
But, of course, that delusion crumbles pretty quickly under the weight of his guilt.
Exactly. It raises the question, though, who gets to decide who these extraordinary men are? And what gives them the right to decide who lives and who dies?
Right. And can any act, even murder, truly be justified for some supposed greater good? It's a slippery slope for sure. Dostoevsky really makes us think about the dangers of such thinking.
And then we have Porfiry Petrovich, the detective investigating the murders. The psychological games he plays with Raskolnikov are absolutely riveting.
Oh, Porfiry's brilliant. He sees right through Raskolnikov's facade, but instead of just arresting him, he engages in this cat-and-mouse game, pushing him psychologically, almost encouraging him to confess.
Their conversations are like a chess match, full of tension and double meanings. And all the while, Raskolnikov is spiraling further and further into despair. This confession that Porfiry is pushing for, it feels inevitable, doesn't it? Like a train wreck in slow motion. But what finally pushes Raskolnikov over the edge? What makes him break?
Well, it's a combination of things, really. Porfiry's pressure is relentless. He's always one step ahead. But you can't underestimate Sonia's influence either. She never gives up on him, always believing that confessing is the only way to start down the road to redemption.
She's been urging him to do it from the beginning, right? Even though it means prison, possibly something even worse. It's remarkable how she keeps believing in him, even after what he's done.
It really shows the depth of her character. I mean, think about it. She's been through so much herself, but still she embodies this incredible compassion, this unwavering belief that even someone like Raskolnikov can be redeemed.
And ultimately, it's her faith that makes him finally crack, right?
Yes, I think so. But it's also the crushing weight of his own guilt. Remember all those times he nearly confessed? Almost like a part of him wanted the truth to come out all along.
It's like that pressure was building and building until he couldn't hold it in any longer. So he confesses. What happens next?
Well, he's sentenced to 8 years of hard labor in Siberia. And Sonia, staying true to her character, decides to follow him. It's a powerful testament to the power of love and forgiveness. To think that someone would sacrifice everything to follow a convicted murderer to Siberia.
It's an incredible act of selflessness.
Yeah.
But what about Raskolnikov? Is he really remorseful at this point? Does he truly want to seek redemption?
That's where Dostoevsky really digs deep into the human psyche. There are no easy answers here. If there's a path to redemption for Raskolnikov, it's going to be a long and painful one. He's haunted by what he's done, plagued by nightmares and guilt. The physical hardships of Siberia almost pale in comparison to what's going on inside him.
So even in this harsh new reality, his internal struggles don't end. Can you paint us a picture of what life in Siberia is like for him?
Just imagine. He's surrounded by hardened criminals. Life is brutal, unforgiving. But even in that desolate environment, there are glimmers of hope, moments where Raskolnikov seems to be opening himself up to genuine remorse.
What kind of moments? Give me an example.
Well, there's this very poignant scene where he falls ill, delirious with fever. Sonia, tireless as always, nurses him back to health. And it's during that time, when he's at his most vulnerable, that he breaks down completely, weeping openly, expressing a level of remorse we haven't seen before.
It sounds like a major turning point. Would you say this signifies true redemption? Has he finally found peace?
That's the thing about Dostoevsky. He never gives us a clear-cut answer. The ending is left deliberately ambiguous, open to interpretation. Some might see Raskolnikov's breakdown, that newfound vulnerability, as a genuine change of heart, the beginning of true redemption.
But others might disagree.
Exactly. Others might say it's just the start of a very long road. That real moral regeneration requires a much deeper understanding of what he's done, a true willingness to accept full responsibility for his actions.
So he's confessed. He's being punished. But Raskolnikov's story isn't over yet.
Not by a long shot. His time in Siberia, the suffering, the interaction with Sonia, it's all part of a much larger process of self-discovery and moral reckoning. Dostoevsky leaves us with a powerful question. Can a man who has committed such a horrific act ever truly find redemption? And if so, what would that even look like?
It really makes you think. We've followed Raskolnikov from the depths of despair to this flicker of hope, but clearly his journey isn't over.
And that's what makes Crime and Punishment such a powerful and enduring work of literature. It forces us to confront the complexity of the human psyche, the potential for darkness within us all, and that fragile possibility of redemption.
We've really focused on Raskolnikov, but there are so many other fascinating characters in this novel. Porfiry, for example, such a brilliant, insightful detective. He seems to understand Raskolnikov better than Raskolnikov understands himself.
Oh, he's definitely a force to be reckoned with. The way he plays that intricate psychological game with Raskolnikov, it's like he wants him to confess almost as much as Sonia does. Almost like he believes it's the only way for him to find any kind of peace.
And then there's Sonia, this radiant light in such a morally complex and dark world. Her unwavering faith and compassion offer a beacon of hope, not just for Raskolnikov, but for all of humanity.
You can tell Dostoevsky really put a lot of thought into crafting these supporting characters. Each one plays a vital role in shaping Raskolnikov's understanding of himself and the world around him.
We've covered a lot of ground today in our exploration of crime and punishment. We've seen Raskolnikov's descent into darkness, his struggles with guilt and remorse, and that glimmer of hope at the end.
But there's still so much more to uncover, so many layers to Dostoevsky's masterpiece. We've really only scratched the surface here.
Absolutely. You've got the social commentary, the exploration of poverty and inequality in 19th century Russia. There's the philosophical depth, the exploration of nihilism, utilitarianism, the very nature of good and evil.
And, of course, we can't forget the psychological brilliance, the way Dostoevsky delves into those dark recesses of the human mind, revealing the complexities of motivation, guilt, the search for meaning. It's really quite remarkable.
Before we wrap up, though, I want to touch upon one final element that really resonates throughout the novel, the idea of duality. Dostoevsky is constantly presenting us with these contrasting forces, good versus evil, reason versus emotion, poverty versus wealth.
It's woven into the very fabric of the story. Even Raskolnikov himself embodies this duality. His intellect leads him down a dark path while his conscience tortures him with guilt. That internal struggle makes him such a compelling, relatable character.
And it's that duality that makes Crime and Punishment such a rich and rewarding reading experience. It forces us to confront these contradictions within ourselves, to grapple with difficult questions about morality, justice, the human condition. It's not an easy read by any means, but it's a powerful one.
It really is. Great literature like this doesn't just entertain, it stays with you long after you've finished reading, making you think about the world, your place in it, in entirely new ways.
It's been quite a journey, this deep dive into the heart of Crime and Punishment. We've walked with Raskolnikov through his moral crisis, his crime, his punishment, and that glimmer of hope at the end. But as we've said, we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover in this incredible work of literature. So much to unpack, right? But before we let you go, I have one last question for you. What happens to Raskolnikov after those 8 years in Siberia? Does he actually find redemption?
Well, like we said, Dostoevsky leaves the ending open to interpretation. But there are hints, definitely hints, of a spiritual awakening. Remember that scene where Sonia reads to him from the Bible, the story of Lazarus rising from the dead?
Yeah, that felt significant, like a foreshadowing of Raskolnikov's own potential for, well, resurrection.
Right. It's subtle, but it suggests that through suffering, through accepting responsibility, there might be a path towards some kind of moral regeneration. Of course, it's not a happily ever after kind of ending. He's been through a truly profound ordeal. You can't just erase that. The scars of his actions, they're going to stay with him.
So even if there are signs of change, it's not a complete transformation, more like the beginning of a much longer process.
Exactly. Dostoevsky seems to be saying that true redemption, it's not a destination, it's a journey.
And a challenging one at that.
Right.
This deep dive has been quite the journey for us, too. We followed Raskolnikov through his moral crisis, the crime, the punishment, and those glimmers of hope at the end. What do you think Dostoevsky is trying to tell us through all of this, through this complex narrative?
I think he's exploring the very essence of human nature, that capacity for both immense good and terrible evil that we all possess. He doesn't give us easy answers or moral judgments. He just invites us to grapple with those complexities, to confront the darkness within ourselves and consider the possibility, however fragile, of redemption.
He certainly doesn't shy away from difficult questions. This book really makes you think about the nature of guilt, the purpose of punishment. Can true redemption even exist after such a horrific act?
That's what makes Dostoevsky so brilliant. He doesn't preach. He doesn't offer simple solutions. He just gives us this profoundly human story full of flaws and contradictions and leaves us to wrestle with the moral implications.
It's a novel that sticks with you, that's for sure. It makes you question your own moral compass, your own beliefs.
Absolutely. And while we've explored some of the key themes and events, I think it's safe to say this deep dive has only scratched the surface. Crime and Punishment is a book that deserves to be read, reread, and pondered upon.
So to our listeners, if you're intrigued by what we've discussed today, we highly encourage you to seek out Dostoevsky's masterpiece and experience it for yourself. It's not an easy read, but it's definitely a rewarding one.
And as you delve into that world, as you walk alongside Raskolnikov on his journey, consider this. If you were Porfiry, the detective, would you have pushed Raskolnikov to confess? Or would you have let him continue to grapple with his guilt? That dilemma, it speaks volumes about the nature of justice, of forgiveness.
It's a great question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of crime and punishment. We hope you enjoyed exploring its depths with us. Until next time, happy reading.